Continuing with Transport in Plants, Part 2. Water movement through a leaf. Water in effect is being pulled through the plant as a result of transpiration. Water vapor diffuses through an air space through an open stoma. This is the stoma, this opening, and it's surrounded by guard cells. The guard cells are going to control when the stoma is opened or closed. Water is carried away from the leaf surface by air movements. This reduces the water potential inside the leaf. Water evaporates from a mesophyll cell wall into air spaces. Water moves out of the mesophyll cell into the cell wall. Water leaves a xylem vessel through a small channel called a pit. It may enter a mesophyll cell or stay in the cell wall of a mesophyll cell. Water moves up the xylem vessels to replace the water lost in the leaf. We'll look at what the xylem vessel tissues are as well as the pits. Looking at how water moves from the xylem across a leaf. As water moves from the cell walls of mesophyll cells, more water is drawn into the walls to replace it. The water is from the xylem. It's going to move through the vessels, through the unlignified parts of the xylem vessel walls. The water moves from the cell to cell in the leaf along two possible pathways. The symplast pathway, water moves from cell to cell by the plasmodesma. When you look at your cells, this is representing one cell. This is representing a second cell. And so if you're following this symplast pathway, that's the darker green here, it's moving from cell to cell, okay, through the plasmodesma. The plasmodesma, remember, was that narrow thread of cytoplasm that passes through the cell walls of adjacent plant cells, allowing them to have communication between them. And so you have this pathway moving through. The second pathway is your apoplast pathway. Water moves through the cell walls, and that's represented, if you look at the cell wall, that's this outer green structure, the lime green. The water is able to move through the cell wall. Xylem contains more than one type of cell. Important cells for transport are the xylem vessel elements. Each vessel element begins life as a normal plant cell, and then lignin is later laid down within those cell walls. Lignin is a waterproof, hard, strong substance. As it builds up around the cell, the contents of the cell begin to die, leaving empty spaces or lumen inside. Wood is made of xylem, and it gets its strength from the lignin. The xylem vessel elements are elongated and they line up end to end. The end walls of the vessel elements break down to form a continuous tube-like drain, kind of like a drain pipe running through a plant. So you have this tube that's going to form. This long, non-living tube is what's known as a xylem vessel. On the original cell wall, where groups of plasmodesmata are found, no lignin is laid down. These areas appear as gaps in the thick walls of the xylem vessel, and they're called pits. Pits are not open pores. They have the original unthickened cell wall that's going to contain cellulose. This is important so water can move into and out of the vessels, despite the waterproof lignin. Because of the strength of lignin, which is hard to compress or stretch, Xylem also has an important function of support as well as a transport tissue. So in summary, xylem vessels are made from cells joined end to end to form tubes. These cells are dead. The cell walls of the cells are thickened with lignin, a hard, strong material, and then pits in the walls allow for water to move in and out of the tubes. These are diagrams showing you the vessel tissues. The lignin that can form, you can have lignin that's going to be in little circular structures. You can also have it in this spiral structure. And then this is, again, all of the red on this diagram is showing you the lignin. Looking at water across the roots, from the root hairs to the xylem. Xylem in a stem is arranged in a ring and it's closer to the outside structure. In a root, the xylem vessels are in the center of the root. This center piece, this is representing a root. The center is where you would find the xylem. Again, this would be the xylem and the phloem is outside that. So that's your xylem. Water is taken up by root hairs, which are on the outside of the root, growing from the epidermis. Again, this is representing the root. These are the little root hairs. This is a root hair. The hairs increase the surface area for absorption of water and mineral ions. Water enters the root hairs and moves to the cortex of the root, and then enters the xylem in the center of the root. Water can follow the symplast pathway, which is cell to cell by the plasmodesmata, or it can move through the apoplast pathway, which is through the cell walls. It can also switch randomly from one route to the other. Looking at how water moves through the apoplast pathway, cortex cells are surrounded by cell walls containing several layers of cellulose fibers, crisscrossing one another. Water can soak into the walls and move across the root from cell wall to cell wall without entering the cytoplasm of the cortex cells. This just gives you a little breakdown of how it's going to move into the cell wall and move through the cell walls from cell to cell. Looking at how water follows the symplast pathway, water can move through the cytoplasm or vacuole of a cortex cell by osmosis and neighboring cells by interconnections of the plasmodesmata. Water can enter that cytoplasm by osmosis through the partially permeable cell membrane. Water then moves into the sap of the vacuole through the tonoplast by osmosis. Water will then move from cell to cell through the plasmodesmata. And then water can move from cell to cell through adjacent cell surface membranes and cell walls. When water reaches the endodermis, the apoplast is blocked. The endodermis surrounds the vascular tissue in stems and roots. Here's your xylem. This would represent your phloem, so here's your vascular tissue, and they're surrounded by the endodermis. The endodermis has a thick, waterproof, waxy band of suberin. Suberin is an impermeable, waxy substance that's found in the cell walls. This band is called a Casparian strip. So as we look at the diagram, you have the band of suberin, which forms this Casparian strip. It's going to stop the water from moving through the aplast. If you'll notice right here, the water can no longer go through the aplast pathway. However, the water can move through the symplast pathway. This is where you have unthickened parts of the cell wall, so the cytoplasm of the endodermis cells are allowing for the water to move. As the endodermis gets older, the suberin deposits become more extensive. So on this cell, you're looking where the symplast and the aplast pathways have been completely blocked due to the deposit of the suberin. There is an exception. There's passage cells, and this is representing the passage cell that's going to still allow water to move through the symplast pathway. Looking at how water moves from the soil into root hairs, this is showing you a root. It's got little root hairs on it, and it's burrowed down into the soil so that it can take in water. The tip of the root is covered by a tough protective root cap, and it's not permeable to water. Behind the root cap are these fine hair-like structures that are called root hairs. They are extensions of some of the epidermal cells of the root. They reach spaces between the soil particles, as you can see here, and water is going to move into the root hairs by osmosis. Root hairs are relatively low in water potential. The cytoplasm and the cell sap inside the root hairs have considerable quantities of inorganic ions and organic substances such as proteins and sugars, which gives them a lower water content. The large number of very fine root hairs provides a large surface area in contact with the soil surrounding the root, increasing the amount of water absorbed. So this is representing your soil with water. This would be the root hair.